Hello, and welcome back to ATA Live. I'm your usual host, John Humphreys from ATA, and this week, or today at least, I won't dob you in for Thursday yet, right, Dan? But today I'm joined by Dan Ryan of the National Conservative Institute of Australia. Dan, how you doing?
Good. Thanks for inviting me on. Good to continue our 10-year debating session. But yeah, that's great. Thanks.
We have gone back and forth a few times. Dan and I, similar to a lot of people I chat with, I'd say we agree on the overwhelming majority of issues, and we only ever talk about the other ones.
I think. I won't even concede that, John. So yeah.
Well, then we can talk about it. Wonderful. Anyway, by way of usual introduction, this is put on by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance, hence ATA Live, Australian Taxpayers Alliance. So you can find us there down the bottom, taxpayers.org.au. If you enjoy what we do and want us to keep doing it, please consider going there and supporting the campaigns and have a look around, and maybe even become a member. A couple of bucks a month keeps the lights on. But what's the usual other parts of the introduction? So this is live, so that way you'll see all the mistakes live. So as you just saw straight away, I always give immediately an example of that, just as if to prove the point. This is simulcast to YouTube, Facebook, and X, which I'm getting better at calling it X, both on the ATA's channel and my personal channel. So if you're floating around any of those, go check out the other ones and give us a follow there. Just following us there helps make sure we can keep in touch with you later. And of course, if you're watching this right now, please give it a like. Please give it a share. Please send it around to a few people that you either like or that you hate enough to submit them to having to listen to me and Dan argue about economics and politics, so we can get this rolling. And we do take comments as we're going. So feel free to write in the comments, insult us, tell us we're right, tell us we're wrong, ask questions. We have some stuff we normally talk about, but look, I'd say half of the time the comments come in with interesting questions. We get sidetracked and we end up just chatting to the people who are chatting with us in the comments. So please jump in and say hi. So with all of that introductory shenanigans out of the way, Dan, obviously, I should say, I didn't put up the link yet. Dan from the National Conservative Institute, which he did tell me it's the National Conservative Institute of Australia. So it's not me getting the name. It's not him getting the name wrong here. It's me getting the name wrong. But this is the website down the bottom. You can go have a look. Historically, I think the norm is that NatCons and libertarians are supposed to hate each other. So we will try to live up to the norm if we can. But I actually quite enjoy Dan's commentary and his thinking on a lot of issues. We have fun having a beer and shouting at each other. So you'll see a little insight into that maybe today and in the coming week, Dan. But Dan, what have you made so far? Your choice, whether you go first for the budget, because we've just had a thoroughly, in my opinion, another example of mediocre nothing budget and budget response, and then immediately called an election. So we've had a budget and an election since we've spoken last. What's your hot take?
Well, my hot take, my thoughtful, my considered take is that I feel like there hasn't been enough preparation for the Australian public in the lead up to the budget about what this election is meant to be about. Like, I just recall, we're always a bit disappointed in the standard of debate in Australia and across the Western world, but I sort of feel like in previous elections, there was more of a divide, like, are we going to have a carbon tax or not, right? Are we going to have a GST or not? Are we going to stop the boats? And in this election, what are the clear defining issues which differentiates the parties? It's whether you have a income tax cut, targeted at the lower income individuals, or whether you slash the excise, which provides an immediate cut to them. I mean, is that what this election is? What are the broader sort of themes that we're debating here?
It's hard to imagine, isn't it? That's it.
Yeah. So I don't know why that is. I mean, maybe we'll be surprised, and maybe there is stuff coming down the line. But I sort of feel like in previous elections, there are always little kind of policy surprises and announcements, but we kind of knew before the starter's gun what was going to be. What the issues were.
Well, what was that for the last election? So I think you're absolutely right. In 2010 and 2013, Abbott drew a sharp distinction, especially around the mining taxes and carbon taxes. So that was clear. And in 2019, when Morrison won, I think he kind of did the same thing, drew a sharp distinction on net zero.
Yeah.
But in 22, he backed off on that and he said, all right, net zero, I'll sign up. Was there a distinct, maybe my memory is faulty, or maybe that's why Labor won. So maybe there's
I feel like 2022 was so crazy because we were still in the aftermath of COVID. So it was almost like,
they both agreed with each other.
That's right. They agree. I mean, exactly. They should have all been just banished from the face of the political scene forever. But I feel like that's an unfair example to use. But even then, I mean, ironically, Albanese was promising a lower immigration rate than Scott Morrison's government.
Was he really? I don't remember that.
Yeah, he was. No, I remember as clear as day. He was promising we won't match the high. I think it's 180 permanent net migration. That permanent migration that Scott was promising. That's too high. We've got to train our own people first. Amazing rhetoric when you consider the numbers that have flowed in afterwards.
Did they put a number on it? Did they?
Absolutely. He said he wouldn't match it's either 160 or 180. I really should know this off the top of my head, but we've obviously blown that to smithereens. So that should be
permanent versus nom is a slightly different thing, but I think permanent's up to 190 now. So it's interesting that they said they wouldn't match 180. I guess it's technically true they didn't match it.
I think it might have been 160, but anyway, but permanent has been increased over that period of time. Even I think permanent's about one. Anyway, the permanent numbers have been higher than we were expected, and obviously the norm has just blown through the roof. So all of that, I mean, that alone should be the kind of read my tax lips no new taxes lie that they should hang him on. But the problem is they haven't actually committed to that big a difference cut to what.
No, but it's an interesting, just a broader topic, though. I know you're very interested in the topic of immigration. You do the regular podcast with Jordan Knight, and if people haven't seen those, you should go along, check those out. What's the podcast called there? Sorry, that's.
It's an podcast. It's available on the website, and increasingly I interview people from actually around the Western world who are also interested in this topic and others. But immigration is front and foremost about the things.
I think it's fair to say when you and Jordan get into a room or even a virtual room, it won't be long before the topic of immigration and how it needs to be scaled back comes up. So I know it's an issue close to your heart. What do you make of the Liberals' policy of forgetting that the nom existed, or maybe not knowing how to spell it, and saying that they will cut back permanent migration from, I think, was it 190 odd down to 140 for 2 years and then back up to 160? Is that a winning immigration policy, or do you find it a bit underwhelming?
Again, I'm still a member of the LNP, so I'm not criticizing the thing. So it's obviously better than the alternative, right? But I personally think it doesn't really touch the sides, and it doesn't. I think I'm actually a bit perplexed as to why we are somehow immune from the change of rhetoric that now exists across the Western world. Marco Rubio, who's a pretty, sort of sensible dude, sort of used to be a more Reagan-esque type of Republican until he sort of wrapped his head around what Trump was saying. He said at his confirmation hearing, the age of mass migration is over, right? In the UK, the Tories, senior cabinet ministers, previously senior cabinet ministers, are now calling for net zero migration or immigration in the tens of thousands. And bear in mind, the UK is about almost 3 times the size of our population. So that would be very low numbers for Australia. But it's almost beyond the realms of possibility to imagine, I guess outside One Nation, anyone from the major political parties talking about immigration in those terms. And why? I mean, we are, it's a major community concern. Why is it impossible for us to say exactly the same thing as mainstream types in our leading allies are saying?
Yeah, it's been a regular theme we've been bringing up on these live streams. Actually, it keeps coming up that there is a mood globally in the Western world anyway, that's going on in America and in Canada until 2 seconds ago, and in France with Le Pen, and in Germany with AfD, and the Netherlands with Wilders. Sorry, the Netherlands with Geert Wilders, and in Belgium with Flems Belang, and you can go with Austria. Just the highest vote went to their version of One Nation. In Italy, their version of One Nation's in power. In Spain, you got the Vox party on over 20%. It's happening literally everywhere on earth except one country, the one we're in. And it's a really odd thing. What explains
on
fire.
What
I think partly
explains that?
compulsory voting. Compulsory voting means the major parties go out of their way to ignore anyone who they think would vote for them anyway, and they just keep targeting what they think is the swing vote. I think they're making a mistake anyway, right? So I think their logic is that the Liberals can disregard everyone to the right of them, Labor can disregard people to the left of them, and they're fighting over this low information, wishy-washy, mushy centre, which I think is partly true. They are fighting over low information voters. The mistake I think they're making is to think that low information voters are by definition an average between left and right.
I got a different
I don't
theory.
think that's true.
Do you want to hear my theory? I think it's a 70% issue. 70% of the public. You'll get applause on Q&A for saying immigration should be cut. You'll get applause on, I don't know, Andrew Bolt for saying immigration should be cut. And I've just got a comment. Someone saying Marco Rubio ? Yeah, he did say the age of mass migration is over. He said it in his. I really recommend seeing his watching his confirmation or looking it up online, his confirmation hearing, where he says not only age of mass migration is over, but also free trade is crazy and we should stop getting involved in these foreign wars. So, all great NatCon themes. But my theory on why they're not touching immigration is where your treasure is, there your heart lies also. The members of the Liberal Party still inhabit teal land predominantly in the inner city seats, and the people they speak to in that area don't really like the subject of immigration. But actually, the youth, the people they need to win, and the outer suburbs both recognise that this is just like so obvious, an obvious way of cutting. Of addressing cost of living concerns, addressing some of the cultural, social integration, cohesion concerns, and it's sort of just it seems inadequate, the response, and not commensurate to the size of the problem. Just to say we'll do a trim here for 2 years, and that doesn't actually touch the sides of things. So
yeah,
why?
I think there's two different things going on. One is the specific immigration policy, and I think there's also a specific reason that I think they're shy on that, which I also think they're wrong on. But I'll get to that in a second. But there's also just, I think, there's very vague language. It's the vibe. It's the zeitgeist. The zeitgeist in America, the old Republican Party has been basically replaced with a different Republican Party. This is now Trump's Republican Party. In France, the old version of the centre-right party was called the Republicans. They now get about 4% in the polls, and they've been entirely replaced by their version of One Nation. There's a zeitgeist change that's beyond just immigration. Like the same in the Netherlands, the same in Belgium, the same in Germany. Poland now is just a competition between a right-wing and a further right-wing party. There is no left-wing party. I mean, this is going on everywhere in the world, except Australia has basically the exact same boring political contest between two centrist non-entities, and maybe they're wonderful people and maybe they've got deep intellectual sort of thought going on in the background, but it's certainly not on the nightly news. And we've got the exact same boring debate we've always had between the same parties.
I think part of the explanation for that is because unlike Europe and the United States, we haven't lost manufacturing base to the same extent that they have. And so we have actually profited from the China boom in a way that they haven't. And so we haven't, I mean, until the last couple of years. Every country, Sweden, I'm trying to think of
Denmark.
Oh yeah, but obviously Denmark. Yeah, no, that's right. I'm looking for explanations because
in Denmark they got a left-wing anti-immigration party that the right wing is copying. I mean, it's
all this sort of stuff which used to be, concerns about immigration used to be a bit more fringy issue and attracted some fringe types. Now it's much more of a mainstream concern. You can raise immigration levels without being looked, at in a swivel-eyed kind of way, right? So it's genuinely perplexing, and because the reason the Tories lost catastrophically in the UK, everyone now recognises, is because they, allowed what they're now calling the Boris wave, like an inundation of record numbers of people. Well, Boris Johnson was literally imploring his citizens and subjects in the UK to adopt the great Australian points-based model. That's what they adopted, our system, and it led to this catastrophe for them. So, I mean, why we haven't at a political level?
But I think it's the zeitgeist is more than just immigration.
Hey, it's not a winner. Maybe we should adjust. I don't know. It's
right. I agree they should, but I mean, the zeitgeist change is more than just immigration. I mean, Le Pen is known for immigration. She's not only that. I mean, it's the same with all of these sort of movements going on. So I do note that we're just entirely missing out on the zeitgeist, and maybe just Australia's 10 years behind the curve, or because that's another one that you were often 10 years behind sort of America. So maybe that is. But on immigration specifically,
sometimes we're behind. I mean, we're not always. Sometimes we're leaders. Sometimes we're laggards. You know, it's just on this one. I'm genuinely perplexed. I mean, because I've seen polls.
Since you're going specifically just on immigration, let me give you one potential reason just on immigration, because I think the zeitgeist is much bigger than just that. I think there's a sort of there's culture war elements. There's the nature of whether it's morally acceptable to try and defend your own culture. There's bigger things going on in that zeitgeist shift, but immigration is certainly a big part. So on immigration specifically, I think both major parties are spooked by the fact that they don't know how else to run a university system. And I think that's a big part of what's going on here. Now, for me, I think this is almost one of the best arguments for restricting immigration. I mean, if I was an open borders person, I would consider temporarily putting that on hold for a few years just to destroy our universities. So for me, that's a feature, not a bug. But I imagine for the mainstream Liberal and Labor politicians, they would be quite spooked by the fact that I imagine some universities would have to shut down. And a lot of those little fake universities would have to shut down. Some of the big ones might have to. The bigger ones would all have to scale back. I don't mean any of this to scare people or to make a secret anti-immigrant argument. They should be scaled back. I think universities are a part of this sort of trifecta of bureaucrats, media, and academic elite that are destroying our country. I have shed not one tear for them. And even though I used to work in the university sector, I think it's a feature, not a bug. But for mainstream political parties, I think they would look at that and they would go, oh, how am I going to sell to the normies that I'm shutting down some unis, or the universities are halving? Every university would go after them. So like that bureaucrat, media, academic elite would certainly have their teeth out. And then I'm not sure if normies are ready for shutting down unis. And I don't think the government can afford the subsidies they would need to give unis to not shut them down.
See, this is the thing. I don't think there's been the prep work, because in conditioning the public to the real nature of the problem. When you were at university, John, and not to disclose your age, but how many foreign students were there when you were rocking through campus? When I was at university, I would say there was probably about 5%. You know, they were you know, they weren't the mainstream life. And now young people go to university. It's 50% at Sydney University, and it's very high across the board. And it's
very different in different faculties. I gave this story last week when I was saying, like, when I went as a student, I think the classes I remember when I first went through in the 90s, it was overwhelmingly Australian. I mean, it was actually a nice mix. There's a few immigrants, but there was a few enough so that it felt Australian, and you got to meet people from overseas while still inviting them into your culture, not you being invited into theirs. But more recently, when I was lecturing there, and this is very specific to what you're teaching, right? So postgraduate degrees in the Bell faculty in economics and finance are overwhelmingly immigrants. I mean, this is part of the way they get all their money. I was teaching classes that were 90% Chinese. I'd say 70 or 80% from China, and another 10 or 20% from Singapore and Chinese Malaysian and what have you. And it was remarked to me, and it always stuck with me, that some of these students are coming to Australia to get an Australian experience, and instead they're getting a Chinese experience in the landmass of Australia. I imagine a lot of those students, the foreign students, must be feeling a bit ripped off with the experience they're getting in Australia, if they're just the dominant language when they come into an econ class. Well, I'm the only one that doesn't speak economics. Speak Chinese.
As you know, Matt, I spent a lot of time in China. I was a foreign student in China, and I actively sought out locations where there weren't many English-speaking foreigners, so you're forced to learn the local language and everything else. And I've met Chinese parents who have sent their kids. They've gone, oh, look, we'll send our kid to Townsville, which is where I'm originally from, as you know, because there aren't the large Chinese community. Therefore, their English will improve, and they'll speak with a beautiful northern twang. But you know, like if you're going to live in Sydney and Melbourne these days as a foreign student, it would be very hard to extricate yourself from the same community in which you came, because you're surrounded by.
Although even then, my main complaint with universities isn't that the foreign students have decreased the university experience. I enjoyed the university experience, but I kind of lament the fact that most people feel like the process to becoming an adult is you finish school, you go to university for 4 years of drinking and meeting foreign students, and then you start life. I mean, I'm not sure. This is not my economics or my libertarianism. This is just my personal view of life. I'm not sure that's the best way to live life, or should be massively subsidized and encouraged.
How did the universities, just on the economics of the university sector, I mean, there were universities before foreign student numbers were ramped up. So, and I appreciate that the universities say that the foreign students subsidize the cost of the locals. But is it not possible to run is it not possible to do a Doge on the university sector and run it leaner and meaner?
Well, I'm sure you can Doge it. I mean, that'd be easier if they were private, but put that aside for the moment. I'm sure you could make some savings. The bigger issue is, yes, we could absolutely go back to the 50s and 60s where only 5 or 10% of people went to university, and we probably should. But if we want to send 50% of the country to university so they can all study basket weaving and lesbian dance theory, we can only pay for that if we massively ramp up taxes. Everyone has to pay for their own little hobby at university, which they can't afford, or we have some foreign students cross-subsidizing us. And we've clearly gone down that third model. The government's kind of felt like, oh, good, we can scale back our spending. It's the only thing either side of politics has actually scaled back spending on at any time recently is higher education, because they've got at least a HEC system and foreign students. So they want the savings. They can kind of get away with it. Then they get to funnel everyone into university anyway. I think it's a terrible model, but I think both Liberal and Labor desperately want to keep it. And I think that's a big reason why they're very scared of it, sort of touching the NOM. And of course, the NOM is partly seen as a pipeline towards permanent residency. So if they actually just wind back, one solution, which is kind of what the Liberals are doing, which I have some sympathy for, is you wind back the permanent migration, and that decreases the pull factor on the people coming here, hanging out for a few years, trying to snag a permanent residency later. So if you wind back on the permanent residency, you decrease the incentive for everyone to show up and do a fake degree for 5 years while they're waiting for their permanent residency.
Or you just extend the course and enroll in a master's, so you wait out for a change of government, and they change the permanent.
Yeah, but if you really pull back the permanent system, then a lot of people are going to be waiting a lot longer, and some people are going to run out of time and get kicked out, which I think perhaps that's actually a good idea. I'm not ripping on the idea, but yeah, I think they're also aware that one of the reasons people come in and pay for our university degrees is it's just an immigration system for a lot of these Chinese and Indian students. I mean, our universities are probably better than theirs, sure. But for some of them, it's an immigration system. We know that that's what they think. And because of that, we kind of have to, or we don't have to, but the Liberal and Labor parties believe they have to give a wink and a nod to those students going, yeah, we're keeping the backdoor immigration system open. Don't worry. And I think...
I wonder, though, John, there's, as you know, under the trade agreement that Australia signed with India, there's this India labour mobility arrangement where, and I appreciate there's nuance to this, but essentially degrees recognize, there's a mutual recognition of degrees. So if you graduate from the University of Madras, which is probably not a bad uni, but there are plenty of others that aren't quite as good, your credentials will be recognized here. So shouldn't that decrease the demand for Australian tertiary education if you can get
that's what I'm saying. I don't think that, well, some demand is to get our piece of paper. There's some of that, I'm saying. But I think a lot of the demand is just to meet the residency requirements to be able to apply for permanent residency.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, it's much easier to become a permanent resident if you can show you've already lived here and doing something that's considered, approved, like an undergrad degree and then a master's and then some sort of work experience. Yeah. You've got all of that when you go apply for permanent migration, and it's much easier to get in. So I think a lot of people know that, and it's just sending their kids off to university in Australia, and they say, look, you can show up, you can not show up, do whatever you like. I mean, here's a 4-year drinking holiday, but at the end of it, you get that passport.
It's a scam. It's a scam. Yep. Another added to the list. Yep. So eventually people, it's always that you'd like this. I'm sure there's it's not public choice theory, but it's something along those, not public choice theory, but those who have more of an incentive to find the loopholes will always be far more ahead of those seeking to close the loopholes.
Yeah, incentives matter. It's a revolutionary new insight coming to you for the first time today on the 31st of March, 2025. Incentives still matter. Look, you said an interesting thing before, so I hesitate to throw you under the bus. I'd forgotten. I guess I knew. It just didn't occur to me that you still are a member of one of the major parties, and so you've got probably a requirement not to be too critical. So I guess you'll have to count your answers in that term. But in terms of this tax debate, I have found it bizarre. I've gone kind of quiet because I'm not really sure what to make of it yet, that the Labor Party is offering a pretty piss-weak tax cut. And the Liberal Party has said because the tax cut is small, it should be zero. And I'm just baffled. The response to a tax cut that's too small is to make it bigger, not to say that tax cut is so small, we will take it away. And then I understand they say fuel tax cut, but the fuel tax cut is temporary. Labor's income tax cut is permanent. If you swap the names of the people giving these policies, all of the Sky News talking heads would be saying the exact opposite thing. They'd be repeating what I'm saying. A permanent tax cut is better than a temporary one. They'd all be pointing out the fact our income taxes are way too high across the board. and that we need lower taxes in any way we can scramble them. And a small tax cut is the down payment on a bigger one. They wouldn't be saying, oh, well, I don't want tax cuts now if the Liberals were offering it. But the Liberals have said they're not. They're going to go to this election offering to increase the income tax rates.
Yeah, I mean, they're trying to make
this
is the point that I was making earlier. I just don't think there's been enough the framing of what this election is actually about, other than I guess competence. I guess the argument Dutton's making is I'd be slightly more competent than those guys, and I probably wouldn't get involved in some of the more loony green stuff. That, in a nutshell, that's my takeaway. But I don't feel as though, I mean, Labor, in fairness, they would say, look, we've actually done things like this, future built in Australia, which I think is flawed in many ways, but it is different to some of it is a departure in some ways from Hawke Keating, I suppose. It's a little bit more in tune with with developments in the United States and elsewhere. Whereas my question I always ask at the moment is have we moved on from the Hawke Keating Howard era, right? Like, have people really adjusted to the fact that particular policy framework is whatever 30 plus years ago, and the world has changed dramatically, and the flaws in that are starting to appear, right? And so have people actually adjusted to and are recalibrating policy wise? And I just don't know whether there's been much evidence of that, really.
Okay, well, I've got look, this is a new set of thoughts that it's rattling around in my head, which are not properly formed, haven't been written down, so they could be on the wrong track. But there seems to be some evidence that both parties have shifted away from Hawke Keating Howard 10 or 15 years ago. And by that, I was rattling around in the off-budget parts of the budget, which is a real fascination of mine. I do too much budget stuff. My first real job was in budget policy and treasury.
Real nerds out, yeah. And
real nerds, yes. I was going through. We have 6 different development banks, government-owned public development banks in Australia. Now, they're not massive development banks, but there are 6 different ones, and you add them all together, they're about the same size as Bendigo Bank or Bank of Queensland. So, I mean, so the people calling for a development bank in Australia, good news, we've already got 6 of them. Now, half of the money they allocate is just set aside for renewable energy and dumb boondoggles, but that's exactly what you're going to get if you have a public development bank. You're going to have politicians and bureaucrats deciding where the money goes, and they'll screw it up, as you'd expect. But then I was looking through, we've also got 7 managed funds. Now, you know of the Future Fund, but we've got now 7 of them, Future Fund being by far the biggest. And so you've got the government now responsible for allocating and directing a hell of a lot of capital in this economy. The idea that the government was getting out of the capital allocation game, which is kind of part of that Hawke Keating reforms, it's been happening pretty consistently over the last 10 or 15 years. And most of these managed funds, and I think even some of the development banks, were brought in by Liberal parties.
Where are the funds for these funds? Where do they come from? Are they super?
Well, they borrow it. No. They borrow it. So it's just straight onto the gross debt. It doesn't go into net debt because they borrow it, and then in the case of the managed funds, they borrow it and then they borrow that money and they invest it. So it shows up as both an asset and a liability. So it doesn't show up in net debt. It doesn't show up in gross debt.
Expected accounting,
which I'm not as fussed about the managed funds. I mean, I do think you should shut down all the managed funds, including the Future Fund, but that's a topic for another day. It doesn't have me as grumpy as these development banks, because that allows the government to put a hell of a lot of what they do off budget. A lot of the climate spending you don't see in the budget. There's no big line item saying this is how much we're spending on the climate, because they've put a lot of it off budget, right? Where they call it an asset, that asset is devalued. The devaluation of the asset doesn't show up in the budget. The transfer of the money to these sort of
the Queensland government used to do that a lot.
State governments do it as well. Yeah.
So it's crazy town. Yeah, look, wasted money everywhere. I just don't think there's been enough of a recognition amongst the political class here that your business model's not working anymore, dudes. There's debt as far as the eye can see. Young people can't afford a house. We don't produce anything. There's no real attempt to turn the ship around. Like, how do you think the story's going to end? Like, there's no, like, does anyone have any real comment? At least in the United States, say what you will, hate on Trump if you will, but at least there's a sense that we need to do things differently, which I don't get here. Like, I just don't. People think, well, if we just do a little, let's get back to the Howard era. That's when we'll sort things out. And I just think, I don't know, man. Let's not gonna.
This is very true. My fear is when you say, how do they think this is going to end? I suspect a lot of the answers is, oh, well, I don't think it'll end while I'm in Parliament. I can't. You're absolutely right. I mean, the path we're going on debt, on house prices, on just housing affordability of people who grew up in this country. I mean, there's so many things that are trending in a way, and it's hard to. You look at the multiverse, all the parallel universes, where we could go next. And if we stay roughly on our current trajectory, it's hard to see the good outcome. But I can imagine a bunch of versions where you can push the disaster out a decade. I can see that. And current politicians, if you could become prime minister now and then get voted out in 6 years' time, you go down in the history books and you have an electorate named after you or something like that, and then the world collapses 5 years after that. Maybe I'm being too cynical, but.
You're probably not cynical enough. And look, what to do, mate? I think they will. The results of this election will be interesting because they always throw up interesting results, and they are the only poll that matters in the whole, as the sort of saying goes. And I do think you will see more people voting for the minor parties because they recognize that the major parties, like, it is quite significant development, I guess, right? We now have a significant portion of the population that's voting for the minor parties. And it's not as though that should naturally be the case. I mean, Australia's gone through all sorts of crazy periods over the last 100 years, but people tended to vote for the major parties held together. And now, 2025, there's been a split, and it's sort of an interesting phenomenon. I think as you will have seen across the Western world, it's because the existing major parties, if they were clever enough, they would have adopted or appropriated some of the policies which the minor parties are pushing, so as to neutralize them and pull other people back into the tent. But that they just have seemed across the board incapable of doing so. I think that is what people in the most successful party in the UK, the Conservative Party, in the past has refashioned itself and reached new constituencies and done all sorts of somersaults. But they just seem a lot.
I thought you were going to say the old Whigs, of course, the most
more flat-footed than they. Yeah, that's right. But, you see the point I'm making anyway. What do you think explains the rise of the minor parties in Australia?
It's a good question. I mean, it's part of the thing that's going on around the world. I think it's a little bit to do with people getting jaded with democracy, and they don't want to admit that they're jaded with democracy. So they just say they're jaded with whichever was the last party in power. And it creates this bit of a seesaw where you're constantly having to look for something else. You're convinced that if you find the right person to vote for, they will solve your problems. But every time you find someone, they let you down. And so then you just keep looking for another person, and it sends you off searching. Two quick comments about the third party vote thing. So I don't have a great answer on the cause. I think that jaded with democracy is part of it, but maybe there's other things. But one thing to note about the third party vote in Australia is it's very split between different. It's not sort of rallying around one third idea. I mean, a lot to the Greens, a lot to the Teals, some to Pauline, some scattered all over the place. You got the UAP, the Libertarians, the Trumpets, chuck in any other one you can find. You got a 2% and rising for the animals. You now got 3% and rising for cannabis. You don't necessarily bundle all of these together in one coherent alternative movement. And to some degree, that makes this third party movement in Australia a pain in the ass for the majors, without being a coherent alternative for us voters, which is a bit frustrating. But one other quick comment on that before you can disagree with everything I'm saying, if you like. And you'll be in a good position to tell me this, because it's just a vibe I've had from the outside of the major parties. I got the impression there always used to be more tolerance for having mavericks within the major parties. So you could say, look, I know we're going down this path. This is kind of the normie path that we need to go down to win. But of course, we have our bobcatters and we have our rest of, we have these people in our party, and they can go out and speak to the more eccentric parts of the electorate, like maybe people like you and I, and there'd be people who could appeal to us. But, where's the Fergusons in Labor, right? I mean, I think they used to have some people like that could actually sort of speak to a working class person. We've got Alex Antic and Matt Canavan left, but that's down to 2. I mean, there used to be more people with more alternative views instead of all of these sort of cookie cutter, just live your very boring life, follow the opinion polls, do whatever the state director tells you to, and get through life.
Yeah, that's right. I like to say, all successful political parties are capacious. They are able to incorporate multitudes and contradictions in terms. FDR of the New Deal. You had New York Jews and Kennedy, Boston Brahmins, and you had prairie populists and Southern segregationists, and somehow they were all and Jewish intellectuals, and somehow they were all able to talk together because they were all, in some broader sense, for the little guy. And the Reagan coalition, where you had women in tennis shoes in Florida, and you had Californian entrepreneurs, and you had Jewish intellectuals again, but they're all again able to come together because they were keen to be proud of America again. And I feel like the mainstream political parties in Australia, and again across the Western world, with the exception of the United States, which sort of got taken over by an individual and refashioned with a new ideology, but they aren't responsive. Part of the reason for the existence of the minor parties is that the major parties haven't been responsive, and they have been, very quick to kick out dissidents with the false idea that if they include too many dissenting voices within the tent, then that will push them off message, and somehow that will be a weakness rather than a strength. I mean, even in the UK Parliament, which is admittedly bigger than ours, I feel like you have different groups and factions which are able to speak and question their own prime minister more directly without it being considered a gaffe, whereas that is not really how we roll here in Australia. It's a major issue.
I missed that. I mean,
yeah.
Now, obviously, some of my friends and associates quite enjoy the fact that so George Christian and Craig Kelly and what have you left the Liberal Party and did something with minor parties. Now, maybe that's a good thing for those people. Put that aside. I mean, it is an example. I think it's a sad thing that we have a Liberal Party that isn't big enough for a George Christensen or a Craig Kelly.
Or a Labor Party, to be fair. It's both the major parties. Yeah. Where's the broad range of types and demographies in the Labor Party? I just don't think, they're all seem a bit cookie cutter to me. In fact, I was saying someone the other day, look, it'd be interesting to get some of these politicians on a podcast, but would some of them actually have the life experience to be able to sustain an hour's worth of conversation? Because I don't know, beyond the soundbite, are they actually that? Some no doubt are, but I worry that many aren't.
Well, here's the thing. Firstly, I think you're right. The scarier thing is I don't think we'd be able to tell. I mean, I know some of them are, right? Some of them are quite bright, and if let free, and I guarantee you once they leave politics, we'll be able to do a long format interview very eloquently with a lot of great ideas after they're out of politics. But while they're in politics, they'll be constantly having to think, can I say this? Can I say that? It's quite a dangerous. So they end up having to play just as dumb as some of their co-workers that actually are that dumb, and it can be hard to tell. I think, again, Matt Canavan and Alex Antic have sort of shown that it is still possible to carve a niche while saying something interesting inside the tent. I wish there were more like that, though. It's Dan, you're in the Liberal Party, get elected.
Well, look, who knows what happens, but it's hard.
Announcement.
But I do. No, look, who knows? You know how hard it is, John. But it is interesting, and I just think that they haven't fully adjusted to the new media landscape environment either, right? Because they're still worried about what the front page of the Courier Mail will say, rather than appreciating that. It's actually it's a strength to do long forms. It's far safer in a way to do a long form interview on a podcast, because you can explain yourself fully rather than going along to the lectern and giving a set piece speech, and then some journo who only has like 2 seconds to get you wants to ask a got you question because he or she wants to put that on the evening news. I mean, that's you're setting yourself up to fail. When if you actually allow yourself greater exposure, and you'll have some cringy stuff, but you'll also have some bangers, So it's just and throw it all out there, and eventually people will recognize you as being more genuine and thoughtful. If that is indeed what you have, I feel like a lot of these guys don't have the depth of character or intellect to be able to sustain that, and so that's the reason they don't do it. They go in their shell. I note
that Kamala also generally skipped doing long form interviews. I wonder why that is in the American context.
What's that?
But Kamala also skipped doing the whatever.
Yeah.
I never know which one it is, but it's she also skipped the long form, and I think she was probably right to skip the long form, because I do think it exposes you if you're a total midwit or worse.
No,
two quick comments on that for the Australian context. First is, I think the federal directors, state directors, the CHQ, and I'm thinking mostly of the Liberal Party. I haven't thought as much about the Labor Party. I think their tactic of being very safe and playing to the mainstream media and being sort of playing to this low information centrist voter, I think it probably was a very effective tactic for decades gone by. Now, I think the world is shifting. I think there is a zeitgeist going on. I think they could get on it and make it happen, much like Trump has, much like, the Le Pens and the Farages are doing elsewhere. So I think they're making a bit of a strategic mistake, not saying their tactic is inherently dumb. I think it did used to work, but I think they're still stuck in that old tactic while the world is changing. And there is an opportunity for the first state or federal directors with who's supporting a good premier or prime minister to be able to sort of break the mold. And we're just, I guess, waiting for someone with backbone. But another quick comment on that for the Australian context, we don't have a very good alt media system. I mean, we don't have many Joe Rogans. We don't have the Daily Wire. We don't have the Steve Crowders or whoever else you're thinking of in that space. We don't have the Candace Owens or Tucker Carlson, so any of them. Really, I mean, we've got a few that are trying, but it's just, if politicians wanted to go down that path, they wouldn't be getting a huge amount of eyeballs per podcast. So we need to develop both of these, the number of politicians willing to do that, but there also needs to be some progress, some moving forward in the alt media space. Can you name who would be the...
Build it and they will come. I mean, we haven't done, like, yeah, it is interesting. There's, Mark Boris, who's trying to do Joe Rogan, but I feel like that's more of an ego podcast than something that has a coherent philosophy behind it. And he's just him chatting with his, other rich or celebrity mates. But it's not impossible. Look, everything, Australia, like, why doesn't Australia produce the Douglas Murrays or the Jordan Petersons? We have a newspaper proprietor who's been very innovative and successful globally. And I think it's part of the reason is structural. And this is well beyond the kind of remit, but it is interesting. It's like, because the American market is the biggest one. And I think the Americans will happily listen to some Oxbridge type tell them about how their country has failed and how you need to listen to the, my letter from Britain about, the warning. That's sort of like this shit that they pull. But they're not going to take that from Australia. And they want like fluffy animals and friggin' people wrestling with crocs. They don't want to be like, they sort of don't want to hear about the end of Western civilization from Australians. So you have to pick your market and do your different things. We're successful actors. We're successful in other areas in the United States. And I think part of it is, I don't know, we have something unique and interesting to say. We haven't been unsuccessful and better than the Brits in many ways. I mean, why you would listen to the Brits sometimes, I do question. Yeah, look, I think it's happening. I think gradually it's happening in Australia. People are gradually getting used to the idea that it can be beneficial for them to engage in, this crazy new media space that's been around for 10, 20 years now. And then became more comfortable with it.
Scott Harrison makes a decent point here that it's not hugely profitable at the moment, which reminds me of a comment that Damien Curry from the other side, who is one of the burgeoning voices in the old media space, makes. It's that it would be nice if the people with money noticed that there were better alternatives than going down the old path still on our side. There are people with money on our side of politics.
Sure.
I think there is. I think he's right to note, and as we noted, there is a niche here for the people to get in and sort of fill in this alt media space that could be a hugely powerful and good one for the country. And if we could get maybe some of the people with money to see that as an investment, I mean, of course, Dave is somewhat self-interested in asking for that as well.
Sure, there's self-interest there, but it's also never been cheaper to produce.
But he's not wrong. I don't think he's wrong. It's just,
but I mean, to produce high quality, you do need a little bit more dough and stuff. But it's not impossible to speak to people globally when that was previously the preserve of people, Channel 9 or whatever. Look, I think it will happen. Like already, people do engage on X. No one's really taken it by the scruff of its neck and laid down because they haven't had an agenda. There hasn't been an agenda. I mean, Donald Trump, it wasn't just his sort of like mean tweets. It was actually him saying something like with a different political agenda on trade, immigration, and foreign policy. If it was just a slapstick, like
but it is like, because does it have to be the existing politician that comes up with the agenda? Because Trump wasn't an existing politician. And then does it have to go through mainstream media? Because I feel like there is a loud enough minority, perhaps majority, who would be happy to do something quite radical on immigration, for instance, just to pick a topic close to your heart, which I also think Jordan Knight is probably right. This is a touchstone issue that actually could switch elections, and yet both major parties, for some reason, just choose not to switch elections.
And provided it's done,
if they're not going to do it, couldn't we? And if it could be anyone, then why isn't there millions of people following Jordan Knight and throwing their thousands of dollars in their underwear at him? I mean, why isn't it happening? It's an oddity. Maybe that's a rhetorical question, but.
Well, I don't know about the underwear. I mean, he get Jordan can jump in the comments. Hey, Jordan. Look, he's a mate of mine, and he's a director of NatCon as well, Australia as well. So, and he has been good because he on the immigration issue, and there are other issues like trade and foreign policy which are worth tackling, but immigration is he's tackled in a dare I say it, like almost a hip but also professional way. There's no it's not Pauline Hanson in 1996. It's like it's and
I agree.
Oz as well. Yeah, that's right. So and I at the NatCon Oz, I mean, while we deal with probably some sensitive topics, I think it's actually been extremely important to be able to not to just chase the clicks, but to be able to explain to people why, not just those crazy, I hate whatever, choose your ethnic group. I mean, that's crass and that's not what we're about. It's to explain to people logically why the existing sort of framework does not work, in practice and philosophically, and explain why there's an alternative which is both better and morally kind of, just. So
it goes back to your earlier point about doing the work beforehand, and their work hasn't been done to build the intellectual infrastructure that would allow a future political movement to actually take advantage of it.
It's almost as though, John, it's like there's been this, for the last, Trump has won at least presidency in the most competitive, at least twice in the most competitive, market in the political market in the world. And there's this political and intellectual revolution that's occurred in the United States. And we're like, la, 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 la. Well, we just ignore it. As though like, wouldn't the mainstream political class in Australia have gone, something's going on here. Maybe we'll have to think.
Play devil's advocate. If either Albanese or Dutton will win, and neither of them are doing what you suggested, and so they will have gotten away with it. I mean, what I find strange is there isn't this rise in what the people want, the people actually demanding it and actually doing something different. Like, why isn't there suddenly a 25% polling for Pauline Hanson? Now, I think it should be for the Libertarians, but realistically, she's the bigger name on the alternative section on the right. But it's not there. I mean, Jordan Knight doesn't have 3 million people following him and inviting him onto shows and pulling thousands of people on a stage. Why isn't that groundswell there that would force the politicians to act? So far, they're getting away with giving us the same mealy-mouthed, boring, centrist, non-existent policy vacuum that they have for the last 15 years, and they're getting away with it, and one of them's going to win.
Well, again, like the polls, the curious thing is that politicians always quote polls to you and they say why they can't do something. But the polls show, like I said, it's a 70% issue that people want a reduction in immigration. So the question is really why they ignore those polls. It's a winner across the board. You get old Labor voters, you get young people, the exact type of people. We had, okay, there aren't people throwing knickers at Jordan as far as I'm aware, or 3 million followers, but they are. We had a group of almost 100 people at a pub the other night, predominantly young people, to hear him speak, and I gave the vote of thanks and the rest of it. I mean, so that's different. That's where the energy is, and it's sort of just again, I'm kind of gobsmacked as to how you ignore the massive elephant in the room.
So maybe it just needs political courage. I've been ranting on for a while that I think the big the most important variable that is too low at the moment isn't the degree to which people agree with me. I can get over a bit for that to a degree if we could just ramp up the courage rating from 1 out of 10 to at least 5 out of 10. I mean, it's the big missing thing. I think it's the reason people are attracted to Pauline, because I think people just see her behavior as an example of courage. I think it's a big thing that attracts people to Trump and to the people like Le Pen's out there.
She's almost been right too early, and she hasn't built out the infrastructure. And to be honest,
she's not eloquent. She's not a natural leader.
Exactly. And she also has a particular kind of.
But I didn't mean to rip on her. I meant to say that courage is the big thing missing, and perhaps that's what we need. Perhaps it's hard to do without someone with an existing political position to actually rediscover their backbone. Because I mean, we could have it from people outside the system, but we are people from outside the system, and we're all sort of working away. Maybe it needs someone from inside the.
What has been interesting to me, maybe it's something you can speak to directly, but even the somewhat often dim-witted libertarians have recognised that immigration is an issue, right? I have noticed this. It has not been the traditional libertarian position to be immigration restrictionist, and they have recognised it and actually become much more professional than they once were, at least from a distance, is what I see. So I think that has been. That's evidence that there is sort of political change in the air. Now, whether people will vote libertarian because they're in favor of immigration restriction, I mean, to be frank, it probably wouldn't be their first port of call, but it actually makes me look at them again, going, they're kind of, odd looking, some lives, but if they're competent enough to implement some type of immigration restriction, even if it is a bit long-winded and and still assumes people are just economic units more than anything else, then okay, well, I guess at least they're getting a bit more mature and professional. How's that for a bit of a dump on the old libertarians?
Yeah, I can understand, disagree with the old policy. I mean, I don't think anyone would take seriously the idea that the Libertarian Party, their problem is they haven't been thoughtful, they haven't been intelligent. The rip is that they're always far too nerdy. So the idea of intellectual lightweights is just cheeky to wind me up. I have to pull it up.
But I'm saying they actually have come together and put out a very...
No, I understand your point. The substance of your point was true, but you had to sneak in the little thing about intellectual lightweights, and so I chose to respond to that. Maybe it's a lesson that stick to the point instead of the side comment on the side.
It's nerdy looking, but anyway.
Look, yeah, there's something. It'll be interesting to see whether that translates to votes. I mean, that's where we'll know on the 3rd of May, I guess, to see whether people actually go out and change their vote on the issue. But I mean, the political courage thing is a thing that I've been thinking about a lot in recent years. And it is something that we seem to be overwhelmingly lacking when people get near the top. They get close to the top and they just need to shy away, which is why, again, sort of kudos to the people who choose to go on the backbench so they can still speak their mind, but there's fewer and fewer of those. I don't know what to do about that in terms of creating the political courage. Now, we're getting up on...
Do you not think there's been back in the day, again, Fight Back, say what you will, but it was a product of a lot of sort of intellectual reflection about where they thought things should go, and across a whole range of different areas, right? Industrial relations, tax, everything else. There was, like I said before, there was carbon taxes and stopping the boats. They were big kind of issues where the parties had different, different approaches to them. And I just feel like this election, despite the fact that we're actually in the most crazy sort of, time with all sorts of different challenges and different movements sweeping the world, there's been even less sort of reflection and thoughtfulness about the policy development. I mean, is that too wonky? Have I missed something? But where have people been like?
Well, I just think you're 15 years late on this, or maybe 25 years late on this. I mean, I think politicians have mastered the art of mass media democracy. And I don't think that they're changed. I think they're just following their incentives. The incentives have changed, and this is what democracy looks like now. In an era before mass media democracy, I think democracy just worked in a different way. We had to go out, have more of the equivalent of long form podcasts. They weren't podcasts back then. They were actually just talking to people, sitting down with them.
Yeah.
But yes, and that required, a bit more depth. And then we've got into short soundbite, low attention span, mass media democracy. And I suspect the boffins have worked out, look, we can beat the other side if we give a sort of a vague slogan, if we don't differentiate too much on anything except the one thing that's been thoroughly poll tested as being slightly in our favor instead of theirs, then we do a difference that's this big and we pretend the difference is that big, and then we just blanket the media and the airwaves saying your life depends on it.
One of the other things I think, one of the other article of faiths that I know the conservative side, liberal, conservative, whatever you want to call it, centre right, cling to and have actually clung to the mainstream parties since 2000 is this idea that we can't be labelled the nasty party. And if you remember that was a phrase that Theresa May famously used to describe the Conservative Party in the UK back in 2001 or something. And then the whole David Cameron sort of and everything else was meant to shake that label. And the crazy thing is, not focusing on clear points of difference has been not that politically successful. Whereas those who have staked out big differences, like Boris Johnson and Brexit, like Trump and stuff. I mean, Trump, is almost the opposite of what a caricature of what a nasty party politician should look like, and yet politically successful. So it's almost as though these guys fear debate. Yeah. I don't know. I mean,
I'm not sure I agree that it has been. I mean, Boris, when he then ran, ended up being pretty milquetoast, and then when he was his actual campaign didn't draw the sharp distinctions. He was dining in on the fact that people assumed sharp distinctions from the stuff he said before he got close to the leadership, which is a pretty smart tactic. And I think Dutton to some degree is doing that. He's got this reputation of sharp distinctions, but since he's got there, he's saying not too much difference, very careful. I'm sure his federal director and his campaign advisor all is in his ear saying be as boring as possible. And look, the fact that Trump strategy is going to win. It worked for Trump. I'm not sure the lesson from the last 30 years is it normally wins. I mean, remember, John Hewson lost with Fight Back. And I think
he probably had the solution at the time, actually, in that respect.
What he may do, but a lot of people with big ideas have gone down sort of as very brave losers in politics and therefore been quickly forgotten. I suspect the pointy-headed people inside the campaign team saying, don't draw too sharp a distinction on most issues except the one issue that's poll tested very well and very curated on that. I suspect for most of the last 20 to 30 years, they've been right about the correct way to play politics. This is the sad thing about this. It's not a fixable problem if they're actually playing the correct strategy. And anyone who plays a different strategy loses to them.
As why have the mainstream political parties across the Western world imploded?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I feel like there's a zeitgeist shift going on now, which is why I'm saying I actually think that they're still playing the strategy that was the correct strategy for the last 20 or 30 years. And maybe it's still the same correct strategy for this election. I wish it wasn't. It seems to be at the moment. But there's a zeitgeist shift going on in the rest of the world. It's currently skipping at Australia. And I'm just sort of pulling my hair out saying, like, where is the zeitgeist for us? Or can we kickstart it? And when that happens, the correct election strategy is very different. You stop just trying to suck up to the ABC. You just go in there, throw tomatoes at them and say, you suck, you need to be defunded. You just hate what we stand for and you hate the people who vote for us. You throw it in their face instead of saying, please, ABC, please love me. We're not there yet in Australia for some reason, but I'm not just convinced that the people I disagree with, the federal and state directors, I don't think they've been mostly wrong for the last 20 or 30 years. It depresses the hell out of me because if at least they were wrong, we could just sort of fix that and get back on the right path. But if bad policy makes for good politics for 20 years in a row, much harder to fix.
Well, but I don't think so, John.
We need the zeitgeist shift.
If you look at what the Republican Party in the United States said after the loss to Obama, they said things like, oh, well, we need to do all the classic kind of David Cameron things. We need to soften our image, be nice to, immigrant communities and, drop social issues and all the rest of it all. And then you the issues that Trump ran on, kicking out the murderous rapists and everything else, being quite, blunt about Rosie McDonald. It's almost the exact posing in a mugshot not with a smiley, happy people type of face, but with sort of, the grimace one. It's almost the exact opposite to that strategy and was successful. And similarly, you see, Boris Johnson in the famous 2019, I think, election where we went to the Red Wall. I mean, I feel like Brexit we speak to the people in the UK, they still bear scars from that debate. There was a serious division in the country there on a major issue. And it just so happened the divisive issue, leaving the European Union, was the one that was immensely popular amongst people that happened to have voted Labour for the last 100 years. But then Boris Johnson misinterpreted his mandate and decided to become a bohemian liberal again and get, into climate change and open borders trade and open borders immigration and then foreign.
Well, I expect he had the same group of advisors that complaining about.
They're nitwits. I mean, they just misinterpret. I think looking back, you can make the case that even as far back as George W. Bush, where they had, people forget now because of 9/11 and everything else, but in 2000 he was like a compassionate conservatism and had the Benetton lineup of people that were coming out at the Republican conventions, and it was very different to what that party then became. So anyway, I'm
torn between wanting to disagree with you and knowing that that'll keep us spiraling. So I'll say that look, I lament that it's happening. My fear is that I don't think they're dimwits in terms of what they've done for the last 20 or 30 years, because I suspect what they've done has been a vote maximizing strategy. I don't like that. I don't think it's been a country maximizing strategy. I think it's been a very bad direction that it's put our country in, and it's one of the reasons why this debate is so dumbed down now.
Well,
so I lament it a lot.
I'll just conclude on this particular by saying this. After COVID, where the supposed best and the brightest people couldn't do basic analysis on statistics to work out that the whole thing was completely overcooked, I have little faith in their ability to read or interpret basic statistical data like polls.
Yeah, okay. I mean, that's true for the general public, but I mean that's why the general public is still so.
No, the pollies as well, man. This is the pollies. They had no idea. They couldn't do X and Y axis analysis.
We've got a real life experiment going on. I mean, if you are right, One Nation will get over 40% in the polls, and if you are wrong, either Liberal or Labor will win. So we'll be able to check to see which one is.
No. One Nation have other problems, yeah. But what else should we? We're going for an hour, but
I had a few things here that we'd half touched on, but I wouldn't mind getting your take anyway if I word it slightly differently. What's next for the tax debate then? I'm hoping to put a little mini campaign trying to re-encourage the Liberals to do something on income tax, index tax brackets, raise a threshold, just anything. Is there any scope for any movement in tax, do you think, for the next month, or is tax being put to bed on this totally pathetic little little tax cut versus temporary tax cut?
Not to open up a debate that will probably take the next thing, but there is a little itsy bitsy tax that is now being talked about in the United States.
Taxes down, not up. I'm talking about taxes down.
Goods crossing it. Well, it's a complete recalibration, as you know, right? It's about trade realism, and if you introduce a tariff, you incentivize production in your own country, and you can reduce income taxes. Like every little nitwit liberal from the days of Robert Peel, when they've cut tariffs, they've introduced the first piece on income tax. Gough Whitlam cut tariffs, introduced income tax. Bob Hawke cut tariffs, introduced capital gains tax, fringe benefits tax, and all the other nasties, right? So
reading between the line, you're saying that the pitch for the Liberals is I should be saying to them, but the increased tariffs across the board by 5% and give us a cut on income tax. If the tax package was bundled like that. So I know that's what you'd prefer, but can I just say on the politics? So we've been doing a lot of this discussion with our policy hat on, and I love it. So let's take the policy hat off, just the politics hat on. What would Dutton consider? I doubt he'll do a tariffs up at this stage. Maybe he would. That'd be a brave.
No, there's been no prep for it, and I don't think they've thought about it enough to be able to argue it articulately. But look, it's wildly popular. It's why Trump won those industrial Midwest states, right? Because the heartland of the United States, the states that the Republican Party was first established, held its first convention, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, those states, which voted for Abraham Lincoln because he was in favor of a big tariff, in addition to abolishing slavery and the rest of it.
You're enjoying this, aren't you?
that is what it's not only it's politically popular. It is. I heard Cos Samaras the other day actually saying that on a separate podcast that they've started out of the Curtin Institute, he made the same point. Yeah, mate, you got to understand, like the tariffs are actually pretty popular amongst the former industrial, working class people and who used to work for the industrial place. It's like properly sold, properly articulated in pure political terms, they can be a winner as well. I mean, what's wrong with protecting people? Oh, protectionism. What? Well, protecting people is a I know you're going to throw the whole David Ricardo at me. Before we do that, it is actually there's much more thought to it than we're against taxes and goods crossing a border. Taxing a good crossing a border is like bad, therefore go into sort of doctrinal libertarianism. Yeah. I mean, there's more to that. How can we possibly have?
You can't give my side and your side. You have to let me give my side occasionally. And I won't give it too much because I think we're going to talk about it later. But look, I mean, one of the points I've made about all sorts of taxes is you put a moderate tax on most things. It's not great. I'm not a fan of tax. I'd like to have none. But if you put a small tax on most things, it doesn't actually make the world fall apart. What happens is as you ramp up the tax, the efficiency cost of the tax goes up exponentially. So you've got a situation where the costs of a tax are going like that and then upwards. And at the moment, we've got a situation where most of our taxes in Australia, our tariffs are pretty bloody low. Our sales tax is, intermediate to low. A lot of our other taxes, intermediate to low, too higher than I want. But our income tax, bloody huge by world standards. We are significantly over-reliant on income tax, which means the efficiency cost of our income tax is off the charts.
Sure.
And so if we're going to recalibrate that by saying, take down the income tax a bit and shuffle it around and put it elsewhere, maybe tariffs is part of that, that to me could just be sold as tax reform, which would potentially be coherent. So I'm not fussed by that.
I mean, kind of rolls off the tongue. It's a beautiful word, as the president of the United Free World says. And like, I'm just looking at some of the comments. Like, okay, technically, Abraham Lincoln didn't run on abolishing slavery, save the Union, but I think it'd be impossible to deny that the Republican Party was formed. Part of the reason it was formed was because of its opposition to slavery. So that's one point. And protecting people. Look, I mean, I'm joshing around a bit, but part of the reason is you protect your industrial base, you protect people. And you, like in Menzies' time, who the founder of the Liberal Party, he was absolutely in favor of tariffs. And it wasn't because that Presbyterian Scot hadn't read Adam Smith, mate. He would have heard that, wasn't because John Humphreys or Tim Wilson or God knows what said, hey, mate, if you obviously haven't read this Adam Smith. It was because he considered it and thought that it is a better situation to have, as in Menzies' time, a situation where you have no capital gains tax, you have average income tax coming in at a lot higher level of average weekly earnings than we do currently. And you have a tax on goods crossing a border, and it can be done well and done poorly, and you can argue about that. But in terms of a sort of general tax mix, at the moment, we've created a situation where in Australia, it's a red zone. If you want to produce anything or do anything here business-wise, you're taxed at all different angles. But if you get outside the red zone, you can send your good or service back in duty-free, no worries. So it absolutely incentivizes everyone to get out of the country. And the only businesses that remain are those that can't move out of the country, like mining, agriculture, and property, effectively. And
well, our export businesses clearly are in a different category. I mean, I think we'll do a full trade discussion.
That's right.
We'll do it from the beginning. But I mean, one of the points to note is, of course, any tax on imports is a tax on exports. A tax on trade taxes trades both directions. So yes, you're going to then protect some businesses which were otherwise import competing, and you'll destroy some businesses that are exporting. So you'll create some jobs, you'll lose some jobs, and then you get into the debate about which of the jobs we actually want, which is a reasonable debate to have.
This is just a teaser for a later discussion we're going to have on full-blown cage match fight on tariffs. So, and because I just appreciate some of these libertarians, they're hearing these arguments for the first time, and I want to kind of gradually, get them to realize that.
Or the frog in boiling water.
I'm shocked when the first time they hear these arguments. So there you go.
Oh, Rob, you should just try to antagonize me, bastard. But anyway, that's it. So tax. I take it the long and short of that is you think that we're not likely to see any movement on tax. So the actual political answer, putting the tariffs thing aside for now, in this campaign.
Not now. Like between now and the election,
it's over.
Can you?
It's going to be.
Can you see literally?
My remaining hope is that between now and the election, there's going to have to be other policy announcements. Perhaps the Liberals had a plan of having indexing tax brackets or something like that in their back pocket to announce 2 or 3 weeks before the election. Remember, last election, they announced one of their best policies, in my opinion, letting people access super to buy houses in the last 2 weeks after people had already started voting. So they've got a track record of announcing some interesting policies at the last minute.
Well,
I'm remaining hopeful that they're at least open to that. And also, if the Libs go back in the polls any further, then they're going to have to throw a Hail Mary. And if sorry, go on, Teals.
I was sorry, man. I was thinking Teals have actually come out to index taxation.
One did, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Which is odd because they voted against the original stage 2 tax cuts. And if you index, taxation, as you well know, you would have eventually sort of arrived at the same result. So how can you?
Well, that's a reason they could actually get it done. I mean, most of the things they talk about, they won't be able to get done. But with the support of people like an Allegra Spender, then they might actually be able to get indexation done. Maybe. It doesn't cost too much in the short term. It ends up tying the hands of future Labor governments, and I think gives the Liberal Party a future political advantage by reframing the fiscal battleground in future elections. So I think it's a win-win policy, political, and strategy. So win-win-win. Yeah. For the Liberal Party, and maybe if they keep going down in the polls, because they've just dipped down in the polls again, so it's looking at current polling like an Albanese government. If they go back any further, they'll need to throw a Hail Mary. So even if they didn't already have a plan to do something fun on tax, if they stay behind in the polls for a couple of weeks, perhaps the hard heads inside the campaign HQ will start thinking, what Hail Mary can we throw? Maybe fixing income taxes.
It'd be nice to have a commitment from one of the major parties to match the Teals on indexing income tax, because at least then you'd have, in theory at least, a commitment which would pass Parliament and probably the Senate as well to get through. And I mean, they probably want to do something else, like raise the GST in response, or something along those lines. But at least you finally get you do get a tax cut out of this one way or another, and just put it on the credit card and watch the debt
Anyway,
go.
so this last few minutes is probably just me wish casting into the internet. All right, I've verbalized my wishes. Internet, go and make it come true. Speaking of the opinion polls, speaking of the opinion polls, going down. The latest opinion poll, I think 51-49 for Albanese. And I believe the Libs need like 52-53 to have a chance of forming government, like 52, a narrow minority, 53 if they want an outright. What do you think's causing the shift towards Albanese, and what should Dutton do to fix it? Or is it beyond fixable for this election?
Well, there's still 4 weeks of the campaign to go almost. So let's see. I think the poll people I've listened to and discussed with recognize that there's still stacks of undecided voters. And also it really does matter what people think in particular states. Like those national polls are influenced by what, Queensland still has very high LNP vote. It's less high in some of those other states. It really will come down to what voters in Victoria and New South Wales think, and I don't think they made up their mind a lot of cases. That's the impression I get reading the polls. They're still kind of like, I hate this economy. I'm not sold on either of these dudes. Let's weigh it up. And I think there has to be a compelling reason for a change of government. It's like the burden that the Conservatives have have to carry. So I think they have to say something more to get people, to change a first-term government is really hard too. But I don't know. In his fairness, he's a pretty level-headed guy. He's so
the he being Dutton?
Dutton, yeah, he's not an ego like a Malcolm Turnbull or some of the others. He's safe pair of hands. He does understand that things need to change. I think there needs to be, frankly, some more people from these other shadow ministers come forth and kind of explain things in more expansive terms about how they're actually going to do it, rather than just saying they're going to do it. So I don't know. It's a tough gig, I accept. Well, it's a tough gig too, because it's a really tough chessboard they're playing with. They've got to try to pick up seats, Teal seats, and then they've got to pick up old Labor seats, and they've got to do it across multiple states, and they got, in places like WA, which used to be very favourable, now for some oddball reason they still think, the Labor Party are the bee's knees. So it's a tough one. It's a really tough one.
Well, outside of New South Wales, Victoria, there's not many places up for grab. I think there's 2 in WA, realistically, 1 in South Australia, 1 in Tasmania. So that gets you to 4 running through the small states. Queensland is mostly LNP anyway. So the Blair with an outside chance at maybe a Rankin, or it seems unlikely.
Lily maybe. I think Lily's probably a possibility. We almost won that in the election. So yeah. Anyway.
So let's put in a possible 2 in Queensland and just assume the Teals don't take that Gold Coast seat. So, but that only gets you to 6, and they're going to need at least like 16 to form a minority government with Sharkey, Katter, and Spender. So that means a lot of the heavy lifting's left in Sydney, and sort of outer suburban Sydney.
I actually don't think Allegra Spender will go with Dutton, but I think Dai Le from Fowler, the Vietnamese candidate.
Don't know she'll win is the problem there.
She's been, maybe, I don't know. Who knows? I have no real inside knowledge on what the polls are there. I think it'd be hard place to poll too. But she has name recognition. She's the incumbent, and she did come from nowhere to win it. So last time, so I'd back her. So you get her, you get Sharkey. Allegra Spender maybe. She's probably the more sensible of the Teals, but who knows? I think
her sense of self-preservation would have a guaranteed supply. If Dutton was close, if he was only 1 vote off, and Albanese was going to have to do it with a mishmash of 13 sort of Greens and Rebels, or Dutton gets over the line with supply from Allegra Spender, I think her sense of self-preservation for the next election would have her go with Dutton. All the other Teals, I think, would go with Albanese.
Maybe. I don't think there's actually that big a downside for someone like her in Wentworth settling up with.
I think that some of her voters still think she's a Liberal. That's the issue.
Do they really? I mean, we've had in Queensland, as you know, right? We now got 3 Green seats. I mean, did those guys and they would have been won by Teals if Teals had run credible candidates. So I don't think these guys who vote for Green or Teals actually think don't vote for Teals. I think there's been statistical analysis on this showing the people who vote
There has by me, and I'll give you the insight. So looking at the Teal seats in New South Wales, and this is fascinating. You can do it as the Liberal versus the Teal, and you can work out what the equivalent would be divvying up the preferences on Liberal versus Labor. And the Teal outperforms Labor by a margin that is bigger than the difference. So in those seats, they would still go Liberal if it was Liberal versus Labor. So those people are still majority preferring Liberal to Labor, but a majority voting for a Teal. That tells you something, right? I mean, that tells you at least some of those people, and enough to make a difference between winning and losing, are saying, I prefer Liberal to Labor, but I'll vote for Allegra Spender.
Yeah, but the Allegra Spender types, I mean, like, I think, and in Curtin and all these Teals, it's the progressivism culturally, which is what really attracts
them. Then why are they picking Liberal over Labor? These voters prefer Liberal to Labor and Liberal to Green, but are picking Teal. I mean, not all of them. It's obviously like 51% or 53% are voting for the Teal. But of those, about 4 or 5% of those people say they are strictly Liberal over Labor or Green.
Yeah, this
like that. This is why if they keep running these independent Teals, which are like these secret candidates, the best response the Liberals could do if they were smart about it, but I doubt they will be, is to run a Liberal-friendly independent. You run a Liberal-friendly independent against a Labor-friendly independent. Both of them now don't have the baggage.
I don't doubt your statistical analysis. You just got to ask yourself why voters in Warringah would vote any differently to the voters in Ryan and Brisbane, where I'm at. That's my question, because, I would have thought Wentworth would have been a much more sort of even more progressive than the inner city Ryan in some ways, and yet they voted Green in Ryan. We got 3 Green, lest you forget, we got 3 Green federal members for the state of Brisbane. So I think the guys who voted Green here are more or less the same people who are voting for the Teals in other. I think if we had credible Green, do you see if we had credible Teal candidates in Brisbane in those 3 seats, high profile Allegra Spender types, do you think Teals would have won here? I think they would have.
Well, they wouldn't have gone for Griffith because they are only targeting seats held by the Liberals. But yes, I think the Teal would have picked up the same way the Greens did. Yeah. But I just checked that then when you were saying it. So I'm just looking at the results from the 2022 election, and the Green won with 52.6, and Labor would have won by 52.4. So it's basically the same. So it didn't have the phenomenon. The thing I was talking about, what I was looking at in the New South Wales seats, and I didn't look at all of them. I think I looked at 3. So it might not hold everywhere, but it seemed to hold for those 3. Where the 2-party preferred still showed Liberal was the preferred, 2-party preferred, but Teal won. That isn't true in Ryan. What Ryan showed, look, Ryan was trending towards Labor anyway. I mean, it was already something that people thought it could fall that way, and then the Greens come and snaffed it the last second. And there's a Green state MP within Ryan, as you'd know, in Mayweather or whatever it's called.
I have a Green councillor, a Green state member, and a Green federal member, and silly old Jeanette Young just up the hill from me. So I'm the most repressed political person in Australia.
Isn't it a good thing we have lots of funding going towards these universities like the University of Queensland, just pushing out all of these solid voting groups?
I might wrap it up though, John, if that's okay. Sorry to call quits, but I just got to paying down the national debt, do some work, you know how it is. But yeah, happy to join in. We'll definitely do this cage match on tariffs in the near future. So stay tuned for that, everyone.
Sounds good. I'll have you back again sometime.
Cool, mate. Take it easy. See ya. Bye.
All right. Thanks a lot, Dan.
Bye.
All right. Let me see if I can just bring up the banner there for Dan. That's Dan Ryan from the National Conservative Institute. Now, it's in the US where politics gets a little feisty sometimes. The Natcons and the Libertarians aren't known for liking each other, and Dan and I disagree on enough, but I also enjoy chatting to him, and we agree on a bunch too. So anyway, if you're interested in what he's doing, go and check out their website. You can have a bit of fun over there. Now, I did have on the agenda to run through another little tax cutting idea, but we've used up an hour 20 in having that chat with Dan, and I'm not sure if it makes sense to dive into a totally new topic at the moment. So I might beg out of that and just have one last comment on one policy that's been going around from the election, because there hasn't been too much. No, all right. I appreciate the love. I will cover it soon. So the policy I was going to talk about was the top marginal tax rate. But I'll just note these comments coming in first. Ethan wants us to check out the campaign going on in Nichols. A bold campaign. Bold is good. A bold libertarian campaign or just a bold campaign? Anyway, bold is good. Better to have bold than not bold. One of the policies that's been floating around that has got some attention, but it's the Liberal Party's gas reservation policy. Now, it's one of the few things. There you go. That's Ethan's answer, Libertarian candidate. And the seat of Nichols, which I believe is rural Victoria. So in just go from Melbourne, drive straight up as if you're going to New South Wales, as if you're trying to escape. And before you can escape, you're stuck in Nichols. So if anyone's curious, you can go and check out Ethan Clark and his campaign. That's apparently their Facebook page. But anyway, the topic, this gas reservation. I don't know if. All right, you're getting a bit of love there already, Ethan. There you go. I don't know if there's been much recognition of this. There doesn't seem to be enough detail on the policy yet. It strikes me as a policy that has the potential to be politically a winner, depending on how people interpret it. I don't know if it's a policy winner, or at least I'm not clear yet because we don't have enough detail. But the idea is Australia produces a lot of gas, right? And gas is one of the important contributing elements into our energy system. So all the energy goes from the energy producers into the energy market, and then from the energy market out to the retailers who distribute energy to us. And so you want to make energy cheaper. You could try to get the distribution cheaper, but that's just the poles and wires. I mean, that isn't the thing that's driving up the price. You've got to try and get the price of the energy being sold into the energy market cheaper. I mean, that's kind of the goal, unless you're doing a gimmick like a subsidy or something like that. The real issue of changing energy prices is to change the price that the energy is being sold by the energy producers into that wholesale market. And how do you get that energy being sold at a cheaper rate into the wholesale market? So the left will just tell you build more renewable energy and they will just flood the market. All right, I guess that's one theory. It doesn't seem to be working great at the moment. The other option is sort of coal and gas and nuclear. Now, one of the issues there, you've got your coal gas fired, you've got your gas fired, and you've got your coal fired power stations. They can then put energy into the energy market, but one of their inputs is the price of coal or the price of gas. Right. So then you've got one step back. What is the price of coal? What is the price of gas? Now, Australia produces a lot of coal and a lot of gas. I keep putting coal in because it should be part of the conversation. Of course, the Liberal Party shied away from it. They're a bit scared of coal. So the conversation is about gas. But in both instances, we produce it's a technical term, a metric shit ton of coal and gas and uranium. So we got the raw products. Right? And then you can take those raw products into electricity power stations that turn that into energy and then put the energy on the grid, the electricity on the grid. And we produce a lot of gas and coal, but we still pay a relatively high amount for electricity created by gas and coal. And that isn't that much of an anomaly when you understand that we live in an international market. So, I mean, Dan Ryan would quite enjoy the thing I'm about to say now. Because we trade so much, realistically, the price that matters for us is the international price of gas and coal. So if the international price goes up, the producers in Australia can sell overseas, and they'll only sell in Australia if Australians also pay the international price. Right? So the international price is impacting the price of gas and coal in Australia, which impacts the price of gas and coal power in Australia, which impacts the price of power that you are paying at home. So one potential solution that Liberals have got on mentioned here, which is what WA is already doing for any WA people in the chat, is to tell the producers of gas, or gas or coal or uranium or whatever else you want. You can say, first you have to sell X amount of gas to Australian customers, and only after you've done that can you go on and sell overseas. And then what you're doing there is you are decoupling the Australian gas market from the international gas market. So if the international gas market, the price goes up, who cares? It doesn't matter to us. We're selling gas from our Australian companies to Australian gas users, and the international price doesn't push up our price. So that's the idea, the decoupling. Now, it's always seemed to me that would be quite a politically popular idea. And so it makes some sense for the Liberals to do it. There's a couple of issues that it immediately raises. One is it might still be a good idea, but let me just make clear, it is functionally a tax on our gas producers, right? Which is why the gas producers are going apoplectic and they're very upset and they don't like the policy. Now, it is functionally the same thing. It's just increasing tax on our gas miners or gas producers. So they're not going to like it. Now, you could make the case that, all right, they're big enough, they've got enough money, maybe we should be effectively taxing them and effectively taxing them in a way to get us cheaper energy. Fair enough, but as long as we just know what we're doing up front. So they're going to say that because this is effectively taxing them, this is effectively putting up their costs, that's going to mean some future sort of projects for them, some future gas projects won't be economic and they might not do it. True, we should factor that in. That's a real cost. You could respond with saying, look, well, we have more than enough gas to fund ourselves. The rest is all gravy for the gas company selling overseas, so not going to lose sleep. What may be more relevant in the short term on this topic is how it can be implemented. So there's a few things. I guess these are more questions because I haven't seen the details. I don't know if there are details yet from the Liberal Party. But some questions to consider is the rules regarding the gas companies and gas projects are mostly controlled by the state government, and this is a federal government policy. So that's the first issue. To what degree can they actually get this done? And now there's been some suggestion that what this more likely means is offshore drilling. Now, offshore drilling isn't a state government policy. The feds can then do that. The issue there is the offshore drilling is apparently linked to projects that aren't connected into the Australian consumer market. So they can get the policy done, it just won't benefit us, the people who use electricity, because that gas is only really made to be exported. It's got no pipelines coming in, so we can't actually get access to that gas or gas-fired power. So that's one concern. The other concern is, and I think this is I haven't seen this one written up too much, but this just goes to my economic mind straight away. The Liberal Party has said only non-contracted gas. So we've got gas companies, and they are contracted to sell a certain amount of LPG to, say, Japan. I think it's one of the big customers. And so that's contracted, and they have to sell it to Japan or break contract. And so the Liberals have said, no, we're not going to ask you to break contract, as they shouldn't. Sorry about that. So they're not going to ask the companies to break contract. So they're only going to deal with the uncontracted part of the gas. So the amount of gas that these gas projects have that hasn't been contracted, some of that they have to sell to Australia at a lower price, right? I mean, they won't apparently set the price, but it will be a lower price. So they're not going to want to be doing that. That creates an incentive for our gas companies to make sure all of their gas is already pre-sold on contract. I mean, this is the logical this is the second order effect. This is the behavioral effect. That's why economists exist, is to point out that incentives matter. If you introduce incentives, people are going to respond to incentives. And if the incentive is anytime you sell gas on contract, go get the highest bid, get the highest price you can. Great. Anytime you don't have a pre-existing contract before your gas project starts, I'm afraid you're going to be forced to sell a certain amount of that gas at the lower price into the domestic market. I understand why a politician would want to do that, right? I mean, it's a certain amount of internal coherence in them wanting to do it politically. But won't all those gas projects simply arrange to have more contracts? I mean, if they've got contracts, they get the higher price. If they don't have contracts, they get the lower price. And we're just assuming they won't get more contracts. I mean, it's anyway, we haven't seen the detail. Maybe they've got a workaround for that. But I mean, there are some logistical issues in this gas reservation policy. And if they only mean it for new projects going forward, then it's also not going to work very quickly. So it's an open question about how quickly it can start working. Thank you. Bore us to tears in one of his lives from 2020. Yeah, thanks, Ethan. I love your work. So I see there's been a debate firing on in the chat here. I got to leave that. You guys can go and look in the chat if you wanted to do it. Anyway, that was my quick comment on the gas reservation policy. I don't know if there's going to be too much political fallout because it may be a policy. It's one of these examples of policies that you have to explain too much. And if you explain too much, people tune out. Like Ethan was just saying there, that if something needs to be explained, most people just go, why do I need to know? I'm not interested in tune out. And if they're going to tune out, then I don't know if you get a political bounce or a political penalty for it. Maybe it's maybe if they can sell what they think the consequences are, they'll get the political bounce. But anyway, I don't know. That's my quick take on it. I'm not sure if it's doable. I'm not sure exactly what it means yet. They'll have to tell us exactly what it means, how they can get over those logistical questions about exactly what they're going to have the sort of constitutional right to actually kickstart, and how they're going to get it onto into the wholesale market, and then how they're going to deal with the fact that the gas projects will simply shift to putting a lot more of their sales on pre-existing contracts. So I don't know. We'll find out. We'll find out going forward if they give us more details. That's not a given in this day and age. It may just stay completely free of details, but I guess we'll see in the coming weeks. Anyway, this is ATA Live. I'm going to stop it there. That's an hour and a half. That's enough from me. I will talk about a new tax cutting idea next time. So that's, well, I've got a few coming up, so I'll just let you wait and see what it's going to be next time. But we'll keep talking about those ideas. At the moment, it's not looking great that the Liberals are taking them on board. I was much more hopeful a few weeks ago. I remember Brian was running the odds of them taking on board some of our ideas. It looks like those odds have gone down somewhat. But nonetheless, we need to keep coming up with ideas. We need to keep putting them out there. We need to keep pushing forward. And hopefully we can convince the major parties to change direction on tax. And when they change direction, as Dan was saying in that chat, they need something to be able to grab hold of. They need a new direction to go that's got some legwork being done on it. So we will put in some of the legwork and come up with some of those income tax cutting ideas, and we'll talk more about that on Thursday. I say Thursday because, as usual, ATA Live, we do this Monday and Thursday, 8:30 New South Wales and Victoria time, 7:30 Queensland time for the rest of the states. You'll have to work it out yourself, but you're probably used to that. It's me, sometimes Brian, sometimes other guests, which I think will rotate the guests going forward. We do this to talk about politics and policy and whatever else you have. Where is the banner I put up? This is put on by the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. So do us a favor, go check out the website, join the campaign, sign up to whatever you can sign up to, join the mailing list, and if you are so inclined, become a member. That helps us keep the lights on and keep doing this. That's going to be it from me. My name is, it sounds like I forget it, but I'm doing something in the background. But my name is John Humphreys. I'll be back here 8:30 Sydney time on Thursday to talk more about politics, policy, and tax. Until then, stay safe.